The cozy diner on Main Street, known for its warm ambiance and hearty meals, was bustling with the usual lunchtime crowd. Locals laughed over steaming mugs of coffee, and the scent of freshly baked pies wafted from the kitchen. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary day, but beneath the surface, something unusual was brewing. An incident that would soon grab headlines and spark heated debates. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. John Hayes, a middle-aged veteran who wore his patriotism on his sleeve, walked through the diner's glass doors. His signature Make America Great Again hat was perched firmly atop his head, a proud symbol of his beliefs. John wasn't looking for trouble. He just wanted a hot meal after a long morning of errands. His love for his country had been forged in the fires of his military service, and he wore his political affiliation openly, believing in the values he had fought to defend. He seated himself at a booth near the window and picked up the menu, scanning it as he'd done many times before. The diner was a favorite of his, a place where he usually felt welcome. But today, the atmosphere was different. Eyes flicked toward him, and whispers floated through the air. John, however, was used to reactions like these. His hat had elicited everything from thumbs-ups to cold stares. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to the polarized times. The waitress assigned to his table, Emily, was in her mid-20s with fiery red hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had seen John walk in and immediately felt a surge of irritation. Emily was outspoken about her political views, which starkly opposed John's. To her, his MAGA hat wasn't just a piece of apparel, it was a statement that she couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, she approached his table, her notepad and pen in hand. Her tone was curt as she asked, "What can I get you?" John glanced up, offered her a friendly smile, and said, "I'll have the meatloaf special and a coffee, please." Emily didn't write it down. Instead, she crossed her arms, staring at him with barely concealed hostility. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm, "but I can't serve you. That hat is offensive, and I don't feel comfortable waiting on someone who supports those kinds of beliefs." John was taken aback. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. "I'm just here to eat. My hat shouldn't have anything to do with it." Emily's cheeks flushed, her stance unwavering. "It has everything to do with it. People like you, supporters of that rhetoric, make life harder for people like me. I have the right to refuse service, and I'm exercising that right." The diner grew quiet as nearby patrons tuned in to the escalating exchange. Some seemed shocked, while others nodded in agreement with Emily. John, however, remained composed. He had faced far worse situations in his life. "Look," he said evenly, "I'm not here to argue. I'm just here for a meal. You don't have to agree with me, but refusing service over a hat doesn't seem fair." Emily wasn't swayed. Her frustration boiled over and she said something that left everyone stunned. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." The room froze. A murmur rippled through the diner as people exchanged incredulous glances. John leaned back in his seat, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Go ahead," he said. "Call them. I'm not breaking any laws by sitting here." True to her word, Emily stormed toward the counter, picked up the phone, and dialed 911. The dispatcher on the other end of the line sounded perplexed as Emily described the situation. "There's a man here with a MAGA hat, and I don't feel safe," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. John remained seated, his expression calm but resolute. He wasn't about to let someone trample on his rights without standing his ground. Meanwhile, the other diners whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the air. A police cruiser pulled up outside, and two officers stepped out. They entered the diner, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on John and his hat. Emily hurried over to them, her words spilling out in a torrent as she explained her version of events. "He's wearing that hat," she said, pointing at John as though he were a criminal. "I told him to leave, and he refused." The officers listened patiently before approaching John. "Sir," one of them said, "can you tell us what's going on?" John looked up, his tone respectful but firm. "I came here for a meal, like I've done many times before. She refused to serve me because of my hat and then called you. I haven't done anything wrong." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions neutral. They turned back to Emily, who was growing increasingly agitated. "He's making a statement with that hat," she insisted. "It's offensive and makes me feel unsafe." One of the officers held up a hand to calm her. "Ma'am," he said, "while we understand your feelings, this man isn't breaking any laws by wearing a hat. You can't refuse service based on political beliefs or expressions." Emily's face turned ashen. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The officers weren't going to side with her. In fact, they were gently but firmly explaining that her actions could be considered discriminatory. The crowd in the diner watched with rapt attention, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. John stood up, adjusting his hat. "I'll leave," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want to cause any more trouble. But this isn't right. People should be able to express themselves without fear of being treated like this." Before he could walk out, an older man seated nearby, who had been silently observing the scene, spoke up. "You're not going anywhere, son. Sit back down and eat your meal. This is your right, and we support you." Several other patrons nodded in agreement. One woman even flagged down another waitress and said loudly, "I'll pay for his meal. Bring him whatever he wants." Emily looked around, her confidence crumbling as the tide of public opinion turned against her. The officers, sensing that the situation was diffused, nodded at John. "You're not in the wrong here," one of them said. "If you want to stay, you're welcome to—" John hesitated for a moment before taking his seat again. The other waitress quickly brought him his order, along with a fresh pot of coffee. The tension in the room gradually eased, replaced by a sense of solidarity among many of the diners. Emily, however, was left to reckon with the consequences of her actions. Her manager, who had been watching from the kitchen, stepped forward and pulled her aside. The conversation was quiet but intense. Moments later, Emily removed her apron, her face pale and tight with emotion, and walked out the door. The rest of the meal passed without incident. John thanked the kind strangers who had stood up for him and left a generous tip for the waitress who had taken over his table. As he walked out of the diner, he noticed a small group of people waiting for him outside. They weren't protesters or critics, but supporters, locals who wanted to shake his hand and thank him for his service. The incident didn't end there. Someone had recorded the entire exchange and posted it online, where it quickly went viral. The video sparked a firestorm of debates, with some applauding John for standing up for his rights and others sympathizing with Emily's perspective. The diner issued a public apology stating that they valued all customers and did not condone discrimination of any kind. Emily's employment status remained unclear, but rumors swirled that she had been let go. John, for his part, remained humble in the face of the attention. "I didn't set out to make a statement," he told a local reporter. "I just wanted a meal. But if this helps people understand the importance of respecting each other's rights, then maybe something good can come out of it." The small diner on Main Street eventually returned to its usual rhythm, but the incident left an indelible mark. It served as a poignant reminder of the challenges of navigating a divided world, where symbols and beliefs can ignite passions and provoke strong reactions. For John, it was another chapter in his journey as a veteran and a citizen, a testament to the values he had fought to uphold, even in the face of adversity. The days following the diner incident were anything but ordinary. The video of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, garnering millions of views across social media platforms. Commentary flowed from every corner of the internet, with pundits and influencers from all political stripes weighing in. Some labeled John Hayes a hero for standing his ground, while others criticized him for wearing the MAGA hat in the first place, accusing him of knowingly courting controversy. But for John, life had taken an unexpected turn. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and strangers alike. Some reached out to thank him for his service and express their support. Others sent hate-filled diatribes blaming him for what they saw as a polarizing spectacle. It was a lot for a man who had spent most of his post-military life out of the limelight. John wasn't accustomed to the digital age's relentless scrutiny. He had served in a time when public discourse was slower, when debates happened around dinner tables or in letters to the editor, not in the explosive echo chambers of social media. As a private person, the attention unsettled him. He had returned from military service hoping to live quietly, but now it seemed the world had other plans. Meanwhile, Emily, the waitress whose decision had sparked the whole debacle, found herself grappling with the fallout. While some people lauded her for standing up for her beliefs, others castigated her for discriminating against a customer based on his political expression. The backlash hit her hard. She lost her job at the diner after the manager decided the incident had caused irreparable damage to their reputation. Local newspapers carried the story, with headlines painting her in a variety of lights, from an impassioned activist to an unreasonable instigator. Emily's life unraveled further as her social media accounts were flooded with messages. Some were supportive, calling her brave for speaking her mind. Others, however, were filled with venom, accusing her of being intolerant and narrow-minded. The vitriol was overwhelming, and she quickly deactivated her accounts to escape the constant bombardment. Desperate to escape the chaos, Emily retreated to her small apartment where she wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt justified. She believed in the stance she had taken, that symbols like the MAGA hat represented ideas she could not, in good conscience, condone. But another part of her was filled with regret. She hadn't anticipated how her actions would spiral out of control, nor how they would affect her career and standing in the community. The diner itself wasn't spared the consequences. The management faced intense criticism, with calls for boycotts from both sides of the political spectrum. Some conservatives accused the diner of fostering an environment of discrimination, while progressives questioned the decision to fire Emily, seeing it as a capitulation to public pressure. The owners, a couple who had run the establishment for decades, found themselves at the center of a storm they never wanted. To them, the diner was supposed to be a place where everyone felt welcome, regardless of their political affiliations. In an effort to mend fences, the owners issued a statement emphasizing their commitment to inclusivity. They apologized to John and condemned any form of discrimination, while also expressing regret for the incident's toll on Emily. But in today's polarized climate, their measured response pleased no one. The diner's once steady flow of customers dwindled as the controversy continued to dominate local and national discourse. Amidst the uproar, a reporter from a prominent news outlet reached out to John for an in-depth interview. Initially hesitant, John eventually agreed, hoping to clarify his side of the story and steer the narrative away from the vitriol that had consumed it. Sitting in his modest living room, surrounded by photos of his military service, John spoke candidly about his experience. "That day wasn't about politics for me," he said, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. "It was about standing up for what I believe is a fundamental right, the right to express yourself without fear of being treated differently. I never wanted this to become a spectacle, but now that it has, I hope it reminds people of the importance of respecting each other, even when we don't agree." The interview aired on national television and struck a chord with many viewers. John's calm demeanor and emphasis on mutual respect resonated, offering a counterpoint to the divisive rhetoric that had defined much of the discussion. Still, not everyone was swayed, and debates raged on in living rooms, on talk shows, and across social media platforms. Emily, meanwhile, watched the interview from her couch. Seeing John speak so calmly and reasonably gave her pause. For the first time since the incident, she began to question the assumptions she had made about him. Was he really the embodiment of all she opposed? Or had she allowed her biases to cloud her judgment? The realization was uncomfortable, but it planted the seed of a thought she couldn't ignore. Perhaps she owed him an apology. Weeks passed, and life in the small town gradually returned to normal. The diner remained open but struggled to recover its former popularity. John continued to receive messages of support and criticism, but he made a conscious effort to tune out the noise, focusing instead on his volunteer work with local veterans. Emily, after a period of reflection and self-imposed isolation, decided it was time to move forward. One sunny afternoon, Emily found herself standing outside the community center where John often volunteered. She clutched a small box of homemade cookies, her palms sweaty with nerves. She wasn't sure if he would be willing to speak with her, but she felt compelled to try. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. John was in the main hall, organizing care packages for homeless veterans. When he saw Emily approach, his expression shifted from surprise to cautious curiosity. She stopped a few feet away, the box of cookies held out in front of her like a peace offering. "Hi, Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice wavering. "I'm not sure if you want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize for everything. I acted out of anger that day, and I didn't think about how unfair I was being to you. I'm sorry." John studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. I appreciate you coming here." Encouraged by his response, Emily continued, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I realize now that I let my emotions get the better of me. I judged you based on a symbol without taking the time to see the person wearing it. That wasn't right. John smiled faintly. We all make mistakes, he said. What matters is what we learn from them. The world could use a little more understanding and a lot less judgment. Their conversation marked a turning point for both of them. Emily, inspired by John's willingness to forgive, decided to channel her passion into constructive actions. She began volunteering at the community center, working alongside John to support local veterans. Over time, they developed a mutual respect, finding common ground in their shared desire to help others. The diner incident faded from the headlines, replaced by the next viral controversy. But for John and Emily, it remained a pivotal moment, a reminder of the complexities of human interaction in a divided world. Their unlikely friendship became a symbol of hope for those who had followed their story, proof that even the deepest divides could be bridged with empathy and understanding. Months later, the diner owners hosted a community event aimed at healing the rift that had formed in their town. They invited John and Emily to speak, hoping their story would inspire others to look past their differences. Standing side by side on the small stage, they shared their journey from conflict to reconciliation. It's easy to see someone as your enemy when you don't take the time to know them, Emily said, her voice steady but heartfelt. But when you do, you realize we're all just people trying to do what we think is right. John nodded in agreement. We may not always agree, but that doesn't mean we have to be enemies. Respect and kindness go a long way, even when we see the world differently. The event was a success, drawing a diverse crowd that included people from all walks of life. As the sun set over the small town, there was a palpable sense of unity, a rare and precious moment of connection in a world too often defined by division. The transformation of the small town after the diner incident was more profound than anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just about the viral video or the debates it sparked. It was about the way people began to think about each other and their own actions. For John Hayes and Emily, the ordeal marked the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of their town. After their reconciliation and subsequent collaboration at the community center, the two became unlikely partners in a larger mission, fostering dialogue and understanding in a world deeply divided. Their story had touched many, and invitations to speak at schools, community events, and even corporate settings began to pour in. At first, both were hesitant. John was a private man, and Emily was still recovering from the public scrutiny. But they soon realized they had an opportunity to make a meaningful impact. John began, his deep, steady voice commanding attention. He spoke about his military service, the values he held dear, and the principles of free speech and mutual respect. I wore that hat, he said, gesturing to the infamous MAGA cap he had brought with him, because it represents something I believe in. But I've come to realize that for some, it represents something entirely different. That's why conversations like this matter, so we can understand each other better. Emily followed, her tone more personal and reflective. When I saw that hat, I made assumptions, she admitted. I let my emotions dictate my actions, and I hurt someone because of it. But what I've learned is that we don't have to agree to respect each other. In fact, it's in our disagreements that we have the chance to grow. The students listened intently, their expressions ranging from curiosity to quiet contemplation. When the floor was opened for questions, hands shot up across the room. One student asked John how he stayed calm during the incident, while another questioned Emily about what she had learned from the experience. Their answers were honest and thoughtful, sparking a lively discussion that spilled over into classrooms long after the event ended. The success of that first talk emboldened John and Emily to continue sharing their story. Over the next few months, they traveled to nearby towns, speaking at libraries, community centers, and churches. Each audience brought new perspectives, and John and Emily found themselves learning as much as they taught. They discovered that their story resonated not just because of its dramatic elements, but because it reflected a universal struggle, the challenge of seeing humanity in those who hold opposing views. As their message spread, they began collaborating with organizations dedicated to bridging divides. One such group, a nonprofit focused on conflict resolution, invited them to participate in workshops aimed at training community leaders to handle contentious situations. John and Emily became facilitators, guiding participants through exercises that encouraged empathy, active listening, and critical self-reflection. One memorable workshop took place in a city known for its political activism, where tensions between opposing groups often ran high. The room was filled with people from all walks of life: activists, business owners, teachers, and retirees. The air was thick with apprehension, and the participants initially divided themselves along ideological lines, sitting in clusters that mirrored their beliefs. John broke the ice by sharing a simple truth. "I've stood on battlefields where differences were settled with violence," he said. "And I can tell you, no one truly wins in those situations. Real strength is in finding a way to work together." Emily followed with a personal anecdote about her own transformation. "When I first met John, I didn't see a person, I saw a symbol. But once we started talking, I realized how much we actually have in common. That's what I hope we can all take away from this: the willingness to look beyond the surface." The workshop included activities designed to challenge assumptions. In one exercise, participants were paired with someone who held opposing views and tasked with finding 3 things they had in common. Initially, there was resistance, but as the activity unfolded, laughter and camaraderie began to replace the tension. By the end of the day, people who had entered the room as adversaries were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to continue their conversations. While these efforts brought John and Emily a sense of purpose, their journey wasn't without challenges. They encountered critics at every turn, some who accused them of oversimplifying complex issues, others who doubted the sincerity of their partnership. John faced backlash from fellow veterans who felt he was compromising his beliefs, while Emily was chastised by former allies who saw her actions as a betrayal of progressive values. Despite the criticism, John and Emily remained steadfast. They understood that their mission wasn't to win over everyone, but to plant seeds of understanding where they could. Over time, their efforts began to bear fruit. Letters and emails poured in from people who had been inspired by their story. Teachers wrote about students engaging in more respectful debates, while community leaders shared how they had used John and Emily's methods to diffuse local conflicts. One of the most profound moments came when a young woman approached them after a talk at a university. With tears in her eyes, she thanked them for helping her reconcile with her estranged father, who held opposing political views. "Your story showed me that it's possible to love someone even when you don't agree with them," she said. "It gave me the courage to reach out to him, and now we're rebuilding our relationship." Stories like these reaffirmed John and Emily's belief in the power of dialogue. They began to see their work not as a solution to the world's problems, but as a catalyst for change, small ripples that could grow into waves. Their journey eventually brought them to the national stage. They were invited to speak at a televised town hall event, where a diverse panel of guests explored the theme of unity in a divided America. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure to represent their message authentically weighed heavily on both of them. As they took their seats under the bright studio lights, John leaned over to Emily and whispered, "Whatever happens, we stay true to who we are." The discussion was spirited, with panelists sharing personal stories, data, and philosophical insights. When it was John and Emily's turn, they spoke from the heart, recounting their journey with the same honesty that had guided them all along. "I don't expect everyone to agree with me," John said, "but what I do hope is that we can all agree on the importance of treating each other with dignity." Emily added, "We live in a time when it's easy to surround ourselves with people who think like we do. But growth happens when we step outside of our comfort zones and listen to those who challenge us." The audience erupted in applause, and the moderator remarked on the rarity of such genuine dialogue in today's polarized climate. The event was widely praised for its constructive tone, and John and Emily's story once again captured the nation's attention. As the months turned into years, their partnership evolved into a movement. They co-authored a book, Across the Divide, A Journey of Understanding, which became a bestseller and was adopted as required reading in several schools. They continued to speak, mentor, and advocate for respectful dialogue, building a network of like-minded individuals who shared their vision. Through it all, they never lost sight of the small moments that made their work meaningful. Whether it was a heartfelt letter from a stranger or a quiet conversation with a skeptic, they cherished every instance where their efforts had made a difference. Looking back, neither John nor Emily could have imagined the path their lives would take after that fateful day at the diner. What began as a conflict fueled by misunderstanding had grown into a shared mission to heal and connect. They had learned that change rarely happens in grand gestures. It begins in the smallest of actions. A conversation, an apology, a willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. For John and Emily, the journey wasn't over. It never would be. But as they continued to walk their shared path, they carried with them a profound sense of hope. That even in a divided world, unity was still possible, one conversation at a time. As the movement that John Hayes and Emily had sparked continued to grow, their reach expanded beyond the United States. The universal themes of their story, understanding, forgiveness, and the need for open dialogue, resonated across borders. Invitations began pouring in from international organizations, each eager to adapt John and Emily's message to their own cultural contexts. From town halls in Europe to workshops in South America, their journey took on a global dimension. One of their most impactful experiences occurred during a visit to a post-conflict region in Eastern Europe. They were invited to facilitate a dialogue between two communities divided by decades of ethnic and political tensions. The room was filled with people who had lived through the worst of the conflict, people who had lost loved ones, homes, and a sense of security. The scars were deep, and the air was heavy with mistrust. John and Emily approached the task with humility, acknowledging that their own experiences paled in comparison to the pain these communities had endured. "We're not here to tell you what to do or how to feel," Emily began. "We're here to share what we've learned and to listen to your stories." John added, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting or agreeing on everything. It means finding a way to move forward while honoring the truth of what each of you has been through." The session began slowly, with participants hesitant to open up. But as the hours passed, the room began to shift. People shared their stories, some through tears, others with quiet resolve. For many, it was the first time they had spoken directly to someone from the other side of the divide. By the end of the day, tentative connections had been formed, and the group agreed to continue meeting to build on the progress they had made. For John and Emily, this experience reinforced the power of their mission. It wasn't about solving every problem or healing every wound. It was about creating spaces where those processes could begin. They returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by the resilience and courage they had witnessed. Back in their own community, they continued to lead by example. They launched a local initiative called Bridges Over Barriers, which brought together residents from different political, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. The initiative included monthly potlucks, where participants shared meals and stories, as well as community service projects that encouraged collaboration. Over time, these events transformed the town's social fabric, fostering a sense of unity that transcended differences. One evening, during a particularly lively potluck, a young woman approached John and Emily. "I used to think you were both just symbols of everything wrong with the world," she admitted. "But seeing what you've done here has changed my mind. You've shown me that people can change, and that's given me hope." For John and Emily, moments like this were the true measure of their success. It wasn't about the speeches, the workshops, or the book sales. It was about the lives they touched, one person at a time. Their journey was far from over. The challenges of a divided world remained daunting, and the work of building bridges was never easy. But as they looked out at the diverse crowd gathered in their small town hall, laughing, sharing stories, and working together, they were reminded of why they had started this journey in the first place. It was about something simple yet profound. The belief that understanding, no matter how difficult, was always worth pursuing. And in that belief, they found the strength to keep going. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on the waitress refusing service to the veteran? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.